A young man walks into a crowded auditorium in Los Angeles holding nothing but an old cracked VHS tape of Rocky. His eyes are red, not from the lights, but from the weight of what he's about to do. He's not here for a selfie. He's not even here for an autograph. He's here to thank the man who unknowingly saved his father's life and gave him one in return. Moments later, he stands face to face with Sylvester Stallone. What happens next stuns the entire room and sparks a chain of events that reaches far beyond what anyone expected. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe in second chances, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., we have another unforgettable story waiting for you. He had rehearsed every word, but now, standing just a few feet away from the man who unknowingly saved his father's life, Ethan Carter felt like his throat had closed shut. The room buzzed with electricity, camera flashes, celebrity handlers, excited fans, but Ethan barely registered any of it. All he could hear was the soft crinkle of the plastic VHS tape case in his hands and the echo of his father's voice playing over and over in his mind. "Son, if I hadn't watched that movie, I wouldn't be here, and neither would you." The tape read Rocky in faded block letters, a relic from the 80s. A sticker was half peeled from the corner and a crack ran through the bottom of the case, but that tape had been played more times than Ethan could count. It had become something sacred, not a film, a lifeline. He was just a kid when he first learned the truth. His dad hadn't always been the stable, kind-hearted mechanic who taught him how to change a tire and grill burgers in the backyard. No, Jack Carter had once been a full-blown heroin addict, living in a halfway house in Cincinnati, shattered and suicidal. But one night, as rain battered the small shelter's tin roof, a staff member had wheeled in a rickety TV cart and popped in Rocky. Most of the guys in the room barely noticed. Jack did. Therefore, Jack didn't sleep. He didn't use. He didn't cry. He stared at the ceiling and repeated one line to himself until morning. "It ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." From that night on, Jack started running. Literally. Around the building, then down the block, then 5 miles a day. He detoxed. He relapsed. He detoxed again. But the movie gave him a story to hold on to, one that looked a lot like his own. Ethan was born 14 months later. 31 years had passed. Jack had passed away just 7 weeks ago. And Ethan now stood in Los Angeles, clutching the same VHS tape that had saved his father's life, watching Stallone prepare to speak at a packed fan convention. It was surreal, like reality had melted into something cinematic. Outside the venue that morning, the air smelled like street tacos and car exhaust. Inside, it was different, air-conditioned and humming with anticipation. Movie posters lined the walls. A huge banner overhead read, "Legends, a conversation with Sylvester Stallone." Ethan had never done anything like this. He was a paramedic, not a public speaker. He didn't do fan conventions. But when his mother handed him the old VHS tape at Jack's funeral, he felt something shift, like it wasn't just grief anymore. It was a mission. He arrived 2 hours early and walked the perimeter of the event, unsure if he would really go in. His heart told him he had to. His nerves told him to go home. But just as he was about to turn back, a little boy wearing a red headband and boxing gloves ran past him, shouting, "Yo, Adrian," and laughing. Therefore, Ethan smiled and stepped inside. The hall was bigger than he had imagined. Rows and rows of chairs, a central aisle, and a stage lit like a Broadway show. He found a seat 3 rows back, directly in the center, close enough to see Stallone's face, close enough to maybe, just maybe, say something when the mic opened for questions. He didn't even realize he was squeezing the tape so hard until his knuckles turned white. He could still smell oil and grease on the VHS box. His dad used to keep it on a shelf in the garage. right next to the toolbox. "Every time I felt like using again," Jack once said, "I watched that training montage instead." Stallone walked on stage to a thunderous standing ovation. He looked older than Ethan expected, grayer, slower, but no less powerful. He had that kind of presence that filled the room before he even spoke. Leather jacket, boots, sunglasses, and when he removed them, his eyes scanned the crowd with a warmth Ethan hadn't expected. He started talking about making Rocky on a shoestring, about sleeping in a bus station, about how no one believed in the script. Ethan had heard all the stories before, but today it felt personal, because in one of those stories, his father found the will to stay alive. Ethan's heart thumped louder with each minute. Soon, it would be Q&A time. Soon, he would stand up. He had one shot. He rehearsed again under his breath. "Mr. Stallone, I just wanted to say thank you. Your movie saved my father's life, but..." As the moderator announced the Q&A session, 2 security guards approached Ethan's row. Not for him at first, but then one pointed directly at him. Therefore, he froze. "Sir, can I see your badge?" one of the guards asked. "Badge? What badge?" Ethan scrambled through his backpack, hands trembling. He pulled out his event pass, already crumpled. The guard studied it, then nodded and walked away. Just a routine check. But Ethan's body was shaking like he'd just survived a car crash. A woman with bright blue hair stood up and asked Stallone what his favorite villain was. A man in a Creed t-shirt asked if he would ever return as Rocky. Ethan could barely hear the answers. All he could see was the moment coming closer and closer, like a train you couldn't stop. He stood up, raised his hand. The moderator pointed to him. "Yeah, you, go ahead." Ethan's mouth went dry. He glanced down at the tape in his hand. "Hi, he cleared his throat. "My name's Ethan Carter. I just wanted to say thank you." Stallone smiled and nodded. "My dad, Jack Carter. He was a heroin addict. He almost died more than once. But then, he watched Rocky. And it gave him a reason to fight. A reason to live. He got clean, he started running, he got married, had a son. Me." The room went quiet. "I'm only here because of that movie, and I wanted you to know this." He held up the tape. Stallone's expression didn't change at first. He just stared at the tape. Then he blinked, once, twice. "Can you bring it up here, son?" he said softly. And that's when Ethan's knees buckled, not literally. But it felt like gravity had doubled. He walked toward the stage, heart pounding louder than the applause around him. His hands felt numb, his eyes burned. Somewhere in the crowd, people were pulling out their phones. When he reached the steps, Stallone reached out, not just for the tape, but for Ethan's hand. And then, the stage felt bigger, up close. Ethan handed over the tape with both hands, almost reverently. Stallone took it slowly, like he understood the weight of the moment, even if he didn't yet know the full story behind it. There were a few seconds of silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but charged. "You said this was your dad's?" Stallone asked, running his fingers across the scratched surface of the tape. Ethan nodded. "He passed away 7 weeks ago." Stallone looked up. His voice dropped a register. "I'm sorry?" It wasn't just something polite, it landed. Then he said, "You got a second, kid? Come with me backstage." The crowd murmured. The moderator raised an eyebrow, but Stallone didn't wait for permission. He just placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and led him off the stage. The applause rippled behind them, but Ethan could barely hear it. He felt weightless, or maybe rootless. The backstage hallway was dim and quieter, carpeted floor, bottles of water stacked by a door. A faded movie poster framed on the wall, Rocky IV with Stallone and Dolph Lundgren mid-punch. Ethan stared at it. It looked like a painting now. Mythology. Stallone opened a door to a green room and motioned for Ethan to enter. "You said your dad was a heroin addict?" Ethan sat down slowly on the worn leather couch. Yeah, for a long time, he went through 6 rehabs before something stuck. And Rocky was what stuck? Ethan smiled, but it wasn't a light smile. It was more than that. It became his mirror. He saw himself in that guy getting beat up and getting back up. Stallone sat across from him. His sunglasses were off now, resting on the table between them. His eyes were older than Ethan expected, not just in age, but in what they'd seen. They were eyes that had watched the world change and had changed. He watched the movie every time he wanted to use, Ethan continued. He kept a TV in the garage just to pop in that tape. And he'd run laps around the block after it finished, rain or snow. But, Stallone said. Ethan blinked. What? You paused when you said, every time he wanted to use. There's more? Ethan exhaled sharply. He relapsed once, when I was 8. I found him on the floor in the garage. He had a needle in his hand and Rocky the Tube paused on the TV. He looked up. I hated you that day. Stallone didn't flinch. Because I thought, maybe it wasn't enough. Maybe even Rocky couldn't save him. But he made it back, Stallone. Yeah, and he stayed clean after that, for good. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was like the room needed it, like the air itself had to absorb what had just been shared. Let me tell you something, Stallone. When I made that movie, I was sleeping in a bus station. I had $106 in the bank, a pregnant dog I couldn't feed. And I kept thinking, why would anyone care what I have to say? He leaned forward. But you just told me why. Ethan looked at the floor. He didn't know what to say. I wrote Rocky because seems like your dad watched it for the same reason. Maybe that's what stories are for. There was a pause, then Stallone said, Did your dad ever write to me? Ethan's breath caught. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. He did, but he never mailed it. Stallone unfolded it gently, eyes scanning the handwritten lines. Halfway through, he stopped. He wrote, If I ever meet you, I'll shake your hand like a fighter shaking his coach's hand in the locker room, because that's what you were to me, a coach from a screen. Stallone blinked hard. Damn, he whispered. Your old man could write. Ethan laughed, softly but genuinely. There was a knock at the door. A voice called, Mr. Stallone, they're asking for you. You've got another panel in 10. Stallone waved toward the door. Tell him to wait. He looked back at Ethan. I want you to do something. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Go back out there. I want you to tell that story again, but this time do it holding the mic, not as a fan, as a storyteller. Ethan's heart skipped. I don't know if I can. Kid, you've got one of the greatest stories I've ever heard, and you're sitting on it like it's a secret. That's not how stories work. Ethan swallowed hard. But the fear was still there. That old voice. What if you freeze? What if no one cares? What if this is just a moment for you, not for them? Therefore, he stood up anyway. He nodded. All right. As they stepped out into the hallway, Stallone handed the VHS tape back to him. Keep this close, he said, but not because it's mine. Because it's yours now. Ethan walked out onto the stage to a quiet that didn't feel empty, just expectant. The spotlight was blinding. He took the microphone from the host and exhaled slowly. My name is Ethan Carter, and I have a story to tell. The mic was heavier than Ethan expected. Not physically, but in meaning. His voice trembled slightly as he began, but then it steadied. Word by word, he told the story again. This time, not from his seat, but from the stage. Not for Stallone, but for the room. He spoke of growing up watching his father run laps in the rain, of finding him passed out in the garage, of thinking Rocky had failed. And of the day he realized Rocky hadn't failed. His father had just needed another round. There were no cheers when he finished, no applause, just stillness. That stillness that comes when people have heard something that shook something inside them. It didn't last long. Soon the room rose to its feet. The applause hit like a tidal wave. And for the first time in his life, Ethan didn't feel like a spectator. He felt like part of the story. Afterward, he stepped off stage and rejoined Stallone backstage. "You did good, kid," the actor said, clapping him on the back. "Thanks," Ethan replied, his voice lighter now. "I feel like I just fought a 12-rounder. But what neither of them expected was what happened the next morning. It started with a photo. Someone in the crowd had snapped a picture of Stallone holding Ethan's tape, captioned, "This guy told Stallone his dad beat heroin because of Rocky, and the internet isn't okay." The post exploded, thousands of shares overnight. By noon, a local news station was at Ethan's hotel asking for an interview. He hesitated, but he agreed. He told the story again, this time for the camera. That night, Ethan sat on the hotel bed scrolling through notifications, hundreds of comments, messages from strangers, people saying they cried, saying they needed to hear that today, saying they were going to watch Rocky again, or call their dad, or go for a run. It felt surreal. But not everyone was moved. Therefore, the morning after the interview aired, Ethan received a phone call from the Ohio State Licensing Board. He was being investigated. Why? Because someone had filed an anonymous complaint stating that Ethan had exploited confidential medical experiences for personal gain. At first, he thought it was a prank, but the voice on the phone was cold and official. They were reviewing whether his story, which mentioned details of his father's addiction, violated any state health codes or ethical standards as a licensed paramedic. "But it's my dad," Ethan said, stunned, "and he's passed away." "Nevertheless, the language you used could be interpreted as a breach of professional conduct," the voice said. His heart plummeted. The irony was brutal. He had told the story to honor his father. Now he might lose his license because of it. He didn't tell Stallone, he didn't tell anyone. He flew back to Ohio with a pit in his stomach and a weight on his chest. The VHS tape felt heavier now, like a symbol-turned burden. At home, the silence was louder than it had ever been. His mom was waiting with coffee. She smiled when he walked in, but the moment she saw his face, her smile faded. Ethan sat down at the table, told her everything. She didn't speak for a long time, just sipped her coffee slowly. Then she said, "Your father would have told you not to hide." He nodded. "I know. You didn't exploit anyone. You told the truth." "But it might cost me my job, Mom." "Then let it. If the truth costs you something, it usually means it was worth telling." The silence that followed wasn't comforting, but it was grounding. The hearing was scheduled 10 days later. Ethan dressed in his best shirt and tie. No lawyer, just him. He walked into the small room where 4 board members sat behind a table with papers and pens and neutral expressions. They asked questions. "Did you use your father's medical history for self-promotion?" "No." "Did you consider how your role as a healthcare provider might conflict with public storytelling?" "I was a son before I was a paramedic." They asked about his license, about his future. And then, just before the session ended, one of the women on the board leaned forward and said, "I lost my brother to heroin." Ethan looked up. She held her pen tightly. "If someone had said what you said 20 years ago, maybe he'd still be here." And with that, the tone shifted. The verdict came by email 3 days later. No violation found. Case closed. But by then, something else had happened. A film studio had reached out. They'd seen the clip, heard the story, read the article. They wanted to talk. At first, Ethan said no. He didn't want his father's memory turned into entertainment. But he remembered what Stallone had told him backstage. That's not how stories work. Therefore, he got on a Zoom call. They weren't offering a blockbuster, just a documentary short, about legacy, about addiction, about resilience. They wanted him to help write it, narrate it. Ethan agreed, not because he wanted fame, but because he'd seen what the story had done already. And that's when it happened, the big twist, the moment that redefined everything. Ethan received a package, no return address. Inside, a copy of Rocky, digitally restored, deluxe edition. But when he opened the case, inside was a handwritten note. This time, it's your corner. Keep them standing. S. Taped to the back was a check made out to a Cincinnati recovery center. In his father's name, $50,000. Stallone never called, never posted, never tagged him. He just acted, and Ethan knew, without ever needing to say it out loud, what that meant. It wasn't just about him or his dad anymore, it was about who came next. The sun was beginning to set over Cincinnati, casting long orange shadows across the sidewalk as Ethan pulled into the parking lot of the recovery center. He had passed this building 1,000, never once imagining it would one day carry his. But now, etched into a bronze plaque by the front door, were 5 simple words: the Jack Carter Resilience Wing. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, the evening breeze tugging softly at his sleeves. Inside he could hear faint laughter, a group therapy session maybe, or just life moving forward. The donation had arrived anonymously, just like the note, but Ethan didn't need confirmation. He knew this was Stallone's final round. A silent jab, a knockout made of kindness. The grand opening was small and quiet, just a few dozen people. No cameras, no press. But Ethan was asked to say a few words. He stood in front of the room holding the same VHS tape he'd taken to L.A., now sealed in a glass case next to his. "I used to think stories were just things we watched," he began, "or read, or told at parties." He paused. "But sometimes they become anchors, ladders, flashlights in tunnels." He glanced down at the floor, then up again. "My father found himself in a story, and because of that, I got to have a father at all. And now, maybe someone else in this room will get that same chance." There wasn't applause, just stillness. That stillness that means it mattered. Months passed. Ethan went back to work as a paramedic. He still answered emergency calls, still saw lives fall apart and rebuild in real time, still rode in the back of an ambulance, wondering how it all keeps spinning. But something inside him had changed. He was no longer carrying his father's story like a weight. Now it felt more like a torch. People began to recognize him, not everywhere, just here and there. In coffee shops, at the ER, in gas stations. "You're the guy from that Stallone video, right?" He'd nod, smile, sometimes say yes, sometimes just let the moment pass. And then one night, his phone rang at 3:14 a.m., overdose, male, late 20s. He arrived on scene. The guy was unconscious, but breathing. Paramedics worked fast. Oxygen, Narcan, monitors, protocol. But what caught Ethan's eye wasn't the patient. It was what was playing on the TV in the living room. Rocky, the final scene. The bell, the embrace, the chaos of the ring. He stood there for a second longer than he should have. When they wheeled the guy into the ambulance, Ethan climbed in next to him and whispered, almost unconsciously, "It ain't about how hard you hit." The man's eyelids fluttered. "Right? It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward." The documentary aired 6 months later. It wasn't flashy, it didn't trend, but it reached the right people. Ethan received hundreds of letters, handwritten, emailed, folded into envelopes with trembling ink, from mothers, from recovering addicts, from sons. One letter stood out. It read, "My dad and I hadn't spoken in 4 years. I saw your video. We watched Rocky together last night, and this morning we both ran a mile. One slow, one fast, but we ran." Ethan kept that one in his wallet, along with his father's letter, the one Stallone read, the one he almost never mailed. Years later, Ethan stood outside a school gymnasium. Inside, hundreds of teenagers sat waiting for a speaker. He stepped up to the podium and scanned the crowd. He still hated microphones, still felt his stomach twist every time. But then he remembered his father's words. Fight like it's your last round, even if it's just the first. My name is Ethan Carter, and I want to tell you a story about a man who got knocked down and what it means to stand back up. The snow fell quietly over Cincinnati that December. Christmas lights blinked on porches. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Ethan walked through the cemetery with slow, steady steps. He wore gloves this time. Last year he hadn't. His fingers had gone numb then. He stopped in front of the headstone, brushed off the snow. Jack Carter, 1965, 2023. Get back up, he smiled. I still have it, he said, still showing it, still passing it on. He looked up at the sky. I think you'd like that. The cloud shifted, just slightly. A patch of gold broke through, and then Ethan laughed, because somewhere inside him, he could hear it again. That voice, that line, that one line that saved a life. Yo, Adrian, I did it. He was just a kid. But something in his eyes told me he already knew how to fight. Hey, thanks for watching. You know, life hits hard sometimes, but stories like this, they remind us why we keep getting back up. So if this meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone you love, don't keep it to yourself, share it. And remember, doesn't matter where you come from, what you've been through. What matters is what you do next. I appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next one.